The shed smelled like 40 years of forgotten things. Motor oil that had soaked into pine boards back when Eisenhower was still in the White House. Dust thick enough to write your name in. The dry, sweet rot of old leather and something else underneath it, something heavier, something that smelled like a secret. I was standing in the doorway with a certified letter folded twice in my back pocket and a key in my hand that didn't fit any door I'd ever owned. My name is Daniel Hollies. I'm 43 years old, and 3 weeks before this moment I had nothing left to lose. No wife, no job, no idea who my father really was. And then a stranger from a county I'd never visited mailed me a key to a building I'd never seen and told me my old man had left me what he called, and I quote, a worthless shed. Stay with me on this one. Because what was under that tarp changed everything. I thought I knew about the man who walked out on me when I was 4 years old. Let me back up. 2 months earlier, I was living in a one-bedroom apartment in Toledo, Ohio, that smelled like the upstairs neighbor's cigarettes. I'd worked at the same auto parts plant for 19 years. I had a wife named Carla, 2 cats, a leased truck I couldn't really afford, and a savings account that wouldn't survive a flat tire. Then the plant announced the layoffs on a Tuesday morning in February. They handed us paper envelopes and called it severance. 6 weeks of pay. A handshake from a man in a tie who had never once asked my name in 19 years. I drove home in a snowstorm, and I didn't even feel cold. I just felt like something inside me had clicked off, like a circuit breaker tripping. Carla left a month later. She didn't yell. That was the worst part. She just sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, Danny, I can't do this. I can't watch you become your father. And I didn't even argue with her. Because the truth is, I've been afraid of becoming him my whole life. She took the cats. She left me the couch and a note that said, I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. I didn't even know I was looking for anything. That was the problem. The letter came on a Thursday. The mailman made me sign for it. The envelope was thick. The return address was a law office in a town called Mercer Crossing, somewhere in the high desert of eastern Oregon. I had to look it up on the map. I sat down on the couch, and I read the words 3 times before they made sense. Mr. Hollies, we regret to inform you that your father, Raymond Lee Hollies, passed away on March 14th. We have been retained to execute his estate. You are named as the sole beneficiary. I sat on that couch for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't know how to cry for a man I hadn't seen in 39 years. I just tried to remember his face, and all I could come up with was a vague impression of a beard and the smell of cigarette smoke and the sound of a screen door slamming. I called my mother that night. She lives in Florida with my stepfather, a retired insurance adjuster named Bruce, who has always treated me the way a man treats a stepson he didn't ask for. Polite, distant, faintly disappointed. My mother answered, and when I told her the news she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Danny, your father was not a good man. He wasn't a bad man either. He was just a man who couldn't stay in one place. Bruce came on the line then. He said, son, don't get your hopes up. Then he said something that stuck in me like a splinter for weeks. He said, knowing Ray, he probably left you a worthless shed somewhere and a pile of debt. He said it like he was hoping he was right. The lawyer confirmed most of it the next morning. There was no money. There was no house. There was a piece of land in eastern Oregon, 12 acres of nothing, and on that land there was a single outbuilding. A shed. He said, Mr. Hollies, your father wanted you to come out here in person. He left a key with our office, and he asked that we not describe the contents over the phone. I asked why. He said, I honestly don't know. Your father was a private man. I told Bruce I was driving out to Oregon. He laughed at me, but something in me decided right then that I was going. Not because I expected anything, but because for the first time in 19 years, I had nowhere else to be. I drove for 3 days, through Indiana and Illinois, and the long brown sweep of Nebraska, through Wyoming where the sky was so big it felt like a weight, and finally into Oregon, where the sage stretched in every direction like a brown ocean. Mercer Crossing had a post office, a feed store, a single traffic light, and not much else. Mr. Whitlock was older than I expected, white hair, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He shook my hand for a long time. He said, "Son, you look just like him." Nobody had ever told me that before. He gave me the key and a piece of advice. He said, "Take your time when you get there. Your father wanted you to find it slow." The property was 40 minutes outside of town, on a dirt road that wound up into the foothills. I drove past nothing for half an hour. No houses, no fences, just sage and rock. Then the road dipped into a small valley, and I saw it. 12 acres in a bowl of land, ringed by low hills, with a single building near the center. It was a shed, just like the lawyer said. Maybe 20 feet by 30. Weathered gray wood, a tin roof streaked orange with rust, a single window on one side, and a heavy wooden door with a hasp and a padlock. The grass around it was waist high. Just this one building sitting in the middle of nowhere like a tooth in an empty mouth. I pulled the truck up beside it, and I sat there for a minute with the engine ticking. The afternoon sun was low and yellow. The wind moved through the sage with a sound like distant water. I thought Bruce was right. I thought I drove 3 days for this. But I got out anyway. I walked through the tall grass to the door. The padlock was big and heavy, brass gone green with age. The key fitted like it had been waiting for me. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed too loud in all that silence. I pulled the hasp back. I put my hand on the door. And for some reason, I hesitated. Maybe because I knew, somehow, that whatever was on the other side of that door was going to change me. Maybe because I had spent 40 years building a story about my father in my head, and I wasn't sure I wanted that story rewritten. I took a breath and I pushed the door open. That's when the smell hit me. Motor oil, leather, dust, and something else, something faint and sweet like old pipe tobacco. The light inside was the color of weak tea, slanting in through cracks in the boards, falling in long pale stripes across the floor. The shed was bigger inside than it had looked from the road. The walls were lined with shelves, coffee cans full of bolts and screws, sorted by size, glass jars of nails, a workbench along one wall with tools hung above it on a pegboard, each tool outlined in black marker so it could be put back in exactly the right place. Wrenches by size, screwdrivers by length, a vise bolted to the bench, oiled and clean. And on the bench, set out neatly, 3 rags folded in thirds and a small can of metal polish with the lid off, as if someone had just stepped away for a moment and would be back any second. But none of that was what made my breath catch. What made me stop was the shape in the middle of the floor. There was a tarp, a heavy canvas tarp, dark green, draped over something. Something low and long. Something that took up most of the open space in the center of the shed. The tarp was tied down with rope at 4 corners, the knots tight and clean. There was dust on it, but not much. Less than there should have been after God knows how many years. Like someone had been in here recently. Like someone had been taking care of whatever was underneath. I walked toward it slowly. The floorboards creaked under my boots. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I thought about my mother saying, "Your father was not a good man." I thought about Bruce laughing on the phone. And I thought, whatever this is, I owe it the courtesy of seeing it. I knelt down. I untied the first knot. The rope was old, but it gave easily, like it had been retied many times. I untied the second, the third, the fourth. I took the edge of the tarp in both hands. And I paused. Every story my mother had told me, every silence from my grandparents, every joke Bruce had ever made at the dinner table, every empty space in my own life where a father should have been, all of it was about to be rearranged. Because Raymond Lee Hollies was not who I thought he was. He had spent the last 20 years of his life out here in this shed, alone, with his hands on something he loved, and he had never told a soul. And whatever was under that tarp was the only message he had left behind. I lifted the tarp. I lifted it slow, the way you lift the corner of a bandage when you don't know what's underneath. The canvas slid back and the afternoon light fell across what was beneath it, and for a long moment I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then my eyes adjusted, and my breath went out of me like I'd been punched. It was a motorcycle. But not just any motorcycle. The headlight was a perfect chrome circle. The fuel tank was deep cherry red, hand-painted, with two thin gold pinstripes running along the top. The engine was a V-twin, all polished aluminum and black-painted iron, with twin pushrod tubes rising up out of the rocker boxes like little chimneys. I knew what I was looking at because I'd seen pictures. Every gearhead my age has seen pictures. It was a Harley-Davidson, a 1947 Knucklehead. The last year they made them before they switched to the panhead. And it was perfect. The chrome was polished to a mirror. The tires were new. The leather seat was hand-stitched, the kind of work that takes a man a week of evenings to finish. There wasn't a speck of rust anywhere. It looked like it had rolled off the assembly line in Milwaukee yesterday, except every detail was the kind of detail that only 20 years of patient love can produce. I dropped down onto my knees. I don't even remember deciding to kneel. My legs just gave out. I reached out and I touched the front fender, and the chrome was cool and smooth under my fingertips, and I started to cry. A grown man, 43 years old, broke and divorced and lost, kneeling in a shed in the middle of Oregon, crying over a motorcycle he'd never seen before. Because I understood in that moment what I was looking at. 20 years of my father's evenings. 20 years of his weekends. The only thing he had that was truly his. And he had left it to me. The man who hadn't called me on a single birthday. The man who hadn't shown up to my high school graduation. He had spent the last 2 decades of his life out here in the silence, restoring a 1947 Knucklehead by hand. He had done it for me. Because there was nobody else. I sat on the floor next to the bike for a long time. The light moved across the boards. I ran my hand along the gas tank. I noticed something else, something tucked just behind the rear fender. A small olive green wooden footlocker. The kind a soldier would have used. There were stencils on the lid, faded but readable. Hollies RL. SGT. U.S. Army. The hasp wasn't locked. I opened the lid. Inside, the smell was different. Older. Paper and leather and faint cologne. There were letters tied with string. There were photographs in a manila envelope. There was a folded piece of black leather with patches sewn on it, dusty but intact. There was a small velvet box. And on top of everything, a sealed white envelope with my name written on it in pencil. Daniel. Just Daniel. My father's handwriting. The only piece of his handwriting I had ever seen in my entire life. I held the envelope in my hand, and my fingers were shaking. I didn't open it yet. I couldn't. I needed to see the rest first. I started with the photographs. There were maybe 40 of them, black and white, the kind with scalloped white borders. The first was a young man in an army uniform, squinting into the sun. He had my jaw. He had my eyes. The back was dated 1951. Korea. The next was the same young man with 3 other soldiers, all of them grinning, all holding cigarettes. There were photos of him on a motorcycle in front of a roadside diner, leather jacket, hair slicked back, looking like he'd stepped out of a movie. Photos of him with a group of men, all on bikes, all wearing the same vest, the same patches. The vest was the leather thing in the footlocker. I pulled it out. The patches were faded, but I could read them. A chapter rocker. A name. A skull. I won't say which club. The man's gone now, and the club has its own rules about that. But the cut was real. My father had been a 1%er. A brother in a chapter in the 1950s and into the 1960s, when those clubs were just hard men coming home from a hard war and trying to find each other on the open road. I sat back on my heels. My mother had never said a word about any of it. Not the war. Not the club. Not the bike. She had raised me on a careful, edited version of my father that left out everything that mattered. He drank. He couldn't hold a job. He took off when you were 4. End of story. But here in this footlocker was the rest of the story. I opened the small velvet box. Inside, on a faded silk cushion, was a bronze star. The ribbon was frayed, but the metal was clean. The citation was folded behind it. Sergeant Raymond L. Hollies for heroic achievement in connection with military operations against an armed enemy. Korea, 1952. Pulling 2 wounded men out of a foxhole under enemy fire. I had grown up believing my father was nothing. I had grown up letting Bruce make jokes about him at Thanksgiving. And here was a bronze star in a velvet box in a shed. I opened the bundle of letters next. Most were from the 1950s. Letters from brothers in the club, in the looping handwriting of men who didn't write often. About runs they were planning, about a bike that needed a part, about a chapter meeting in Bakersfield. Letters that called my father Ray, and called each other names like Diesel and Pancho and Whitey. Letters that ended with phrases like keep the shiny side up, brother. The next letters were from my mother. They were dated 1979 through 1983. They were short. They were about me. Danny lost his first tooth. Danny started kindergarten. Danny asked about you again. I read those last words 3 times. So she had written to him. She had let him know I existed and that I missed him. And he had kept every one. Folded carefully, tied with the same string. He had known about me. He had known. The last letters in the stack were different. They were unopened. They were addressed in my father's handwriting to me, at the addresses I had lived at over the years. My apartment in Toledo. The house Carla and I had rented in Sylvania. My dorm room at community college. 12 letters in all. Each one stamped, each one addressed, each one never mailed. He had written to me. Many times. And he had never sent them. He had put them in the footlocker instead. I felt something I don't have a good word for. It wasn't anger. It was the grief of a relationship that almost happened and didn't. I picked up the last envelope. The one with just my name on it. Daniel. I broke the seal with my thumb. I unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The handwriting was shakier than the addresses on the other envelopes. He had written this one recently. Maybe in the last month of his life. I read it in the slanting light of that shed, with the dust hanging in the air and my father's knucklehead beside me like a sleeping animal. The letter said this: Daniel, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have made the drive, and you have lifted the tarp, and you have met the part of me I never had the courage to bring home. I am sorry. I have been a coward for 40 years. I have been a coward in the only way that matters, which is that I let my fear of seeing your face be bigger than my love for you. The war did things to me. The road did things to me. The bottle did things to me. And by the time I had myself put back together, you were already grown, and I told myself you were better off without me. That was the cowardice. Because you were never better off without me. The bike was your grandfather's. He bought her new in '47 when he came home from the Pacific. He died in '78, and she came to me in pieces in a crate. I have been putting her back together ever since. 20 years next April. She is yours now. The footlocker, the patches, the medal, the letters I never sent. The bike, especially the bike. I want you to ride her. I want you to take her out on the road and feel what I felt. I want you to understand that whatever else I was a man who knew how to love one thing, and that thing was the open road, and the brothers who rode it with me. And you, son, even though I never figured out how to tell you. There is no money. There is no house. There is only this. But this is everything I have, and it is yours. Ride safe. Keep the shiny side up. Your father. Ray. I folded the letter. I sat on the wooden floor of that shed, and I leaned my back against the front tire of the Knucklehead, and I cried until I couldn't cry anymore. The sun went down. The light went from yellow to orange to gray to dark. I sat there in the dark with my hand on the spokes of the front wheel, and I listened to the wind moving through the sage outside, and I felt, for the first time in my life, like I had a father. I slept in the shed that night. I didn't want to leave the bike alone. I lay there in the dark, looking up at the silhouette of the Knucklehead against the faint blue of moonlight through the cracks in the boards. I thought about all the evenings my father must have spent in this room. The cold winter nights with a kerosene heater glowing in the corner. The hours and hours of patient work. I drove into town the next morning. I went back to Mr. Whitlock's office. He listened to me talk. The bike. The letters. The footlocker. The Bronze Star. When I was done, he opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. He said, "Daniel, your father came in to see me 4 times in the last 2 years. He was sick by then. He knew what was coming. He said, that bike is worth more than money. Make sure my boy understands that." He slid the folder across the desk. He said, "But you should also understand the money part. I had a friend out of Portland come look at her last fall. He said a fully restored, matching numbers, 1947 Knucklehead in this condition is worth somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000 at auction. Maybe more." I sat back in my chair. He said, "Your father didn't want me to tell you that first. He wanted you to see her first. He wanted you to understand what she was before you knew what she was worth." I called Bruce that night from the motel. The line clicked and he answered on the second ring, chewing something as usual. He said, "Well, Danny, did the old man leave you a yacht?" I said, "Bruce, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to never speak about my father again." He laughed. He said, "What, did he leave you a bag of magic beans?" I said, "Bruce, I'm telling you once. He didn't leave me a worthless shed. He left me his life. And I'm not interested in hearing your jokes about it anymore." There was a long silence. Then my mother got on. She said, "Danny, what happened out there?" I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, in a voice I had never heard her use before, "Oh, Danny. Oh, sweetheart. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know." She told me things she had never told me before. About the war. About the drinking. About the morning he left and never came back. She had loved him, she said. She had really loved him. She just hadn't known how to live with him. She said, I should have told you he was more than just the worst day of our lives. I'm sorry, Danny. I stayed in Mercer Crossing for 2 months. I rented a small house on the edge of town. I drove out to the property every morning. I spent my days in that shed, going over the bike inch by inch. 19 years on an assembly line teaches you a thing or two. I changed the oil. I checked the spark plugs. I went over every bolt. I rubbed Neat's foot oil into the seat. I sat on her for the first time on a Tuesday afternoon in late June. I put my feet up on the pegs, and I gripped the bars, and I thought about my father doing the same thing 1,000 times in this room. I thought, hello, Dad. I thought, I'm sorry it took me so long. I started her 2 days later. I had a brother of the chapter, an old man named Toby, sitting in a folding chair beside me. Toby had ridden with my father in 1962. He was 81 years old, and he wore a vest with patches so faded you could barely read them, and he cried more than I did when he saw the bike. He said, son, when you kick her over, you give her 3 primes and then you ease off the throttle and let her find herself. Don't rush her. She's been asleep a long time. I primed her 3 times. I set the throttle. I leaned my weight onto the kickstart. She turned over on the second kick. The engine caught and rumbled and shook the whole shed, and a cloud of blue smoke rolled out the door, and Toby wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and said, well, I'll be damned, Ray. There she is, old brother. I rode her down the dirt road that afternoon. Just to the highway and back. Maybe 2 miles total. The wind in my face was the cleanest thing I had felt in years. The engine was alive between my knees. Toby clapped me on the shoulder and said, your father is somewhere right now, son, and he is smiling. I planned the ride that fall. I sold most of what I owned back in Toledo. I trailered the Knucklehead out to the coast, to a beach in California where my father and his chapter used to do their annual run in the early 1960s. Toby came with me. So did 3 other old men from the chapter, all in their 70s and 80s, riding more modern bikes because the Knuckleheads were either gone or too precious to risk. We started at the Pacific. I dipped the front tire in the surf, the way the old runs used to begin. We rode east, through the Mojave and the Painted Desert, and across the Continental Divide, and through the Black Hills, and down into the green roll of Iowa. We slept in cheap motels, and twice in the homes of brothers from chapters along the way. We ate breakfast in diners where the waitresses called us honey. We talked about my father every single night. Toby would start it. He'd say, did I ever tell you about the time, Ray, and I got chased out of a roadhouse in Bakersfield by a man with a baseball bat? And the other old men would laugh and a new story would come out, and another piece of my father would slide into place inside me, until by the time we got to the Atlantic, 3 weeks later, I felt like I knew him better than most sons know their living fathers. I dipped the front tire of the Knucklehead in the Atlantic on a cold gray morning in October. The water came up around my boots. I stood there beside the bike, and I felt my father's hand on my shoulder, not literally, but in the way the dead are sometimes with us if we let them be. Toby said, son, that's the longest ride I've done in 20 years and the best ride I've done in 50. He said, your old man would have been proud of this. He said, you're a brother now, whether you wear the patch or not. I said, thanks, Toby. Thanks for telling me who he was. I'm 43 years old. I'm not rich. I haven't sold the bike, and I don't think I ever will. The lawyer was right. She's worth $250,000 on a good day. But she's worth more than that to me. I moved out to Oregon. I got a job at a shop in town doing engine work. The shed is still standing out there on the 12 acres. I go out there on weekends. I drink coffee at the workbench. I sit on the bike. Sometimes I read one of my father's unmailed letters, slowly, one at a time, like I'm rationing the last of something precious. I haven't read them all yet. I want to still have some left when I'm an old man. So that's the story. Stepfather said his father left him a worthless shed. Under the tarp sat a 1947 Knucklehead. But what was really under the tarp wasn't a motorcycle. It was a father. 20 years of patient love from a man who didn't know how to say I'm sorry in any other language than the language of polished chrome and hand-stitched leather, and an engine that he tuned and tuned until it could carry his only son across a continent in his honor. And what was really under the tarp was me, too. The part of me that had grown up believing I came from nothing. The part of me that had believed Bruce. All of that was under the tarp, and when I lifted it, all of it changed. If you have a father you never knew, or a father you think you knew but you're not sure, I want to tell you this. Go look. Drive the 3 days. Open the envelope. Lift the tarp. You may find nothing. You may find everything. But the only way to know is to go. Because sometimes the men who couldn't say it with words said it with their hands instead, and they left their hands work behind for us to find. I still have the certified letter in a drawer. I still have the key. The padlock is gone now. That shed is never going to be locked again as long as I'm alive. Toby comes out twice a month. The other old men come when they can. We sit on folding chairs in the doorway and we drink coffee and we tell stories, and the bike sits in the middle of the floor on her kickstand, and the desert wind moves through the cracks in the boards, and the light falls in long pale stripes the way it did on the afternoon I first walked in, and I think, Dad, I'm here. Thank you for waiting for me. Thank you for the road. Thank you for the brothers. Thank you for the ride. Keep the shiny side up. Wherever you are. I'll see you on the last ride, brother. I'll see you on the last ride.